In this video, I'm going to take you through my full tutor analysis of the ACCA September 2024 SBL exam pre-C notes. My name is James, welcome to my YouTube channel, and feel free to subscribe so you get access to all of my free videos that are going to help you to pass your upcoming exam from my experience. If you'd like access to my exclusive notes, make sure you click the link in the description of this video. You can have it on your phone, take it to work, show your friends. I really don't mind. It's definitely going to help you to pass, along with making sure that you do mock papers to time under exam conditions. And I'm delighted to say I'm affiliated and associated with Astranti, where they actually offer a free ACCA SBL pack for students. If you click the link, it's in the description below. And if you were to actually purchase any mocks or other packs they have available, then for pure transparency as always on the channel, I'd be entitled to a small commission, which goes to supporting the YouTube channel itself. So again, make the most of it. All the details are below. Enjoy the video. It's going to take you through everything from start to finish. Get comfy, take some notes, and I'll see you at the end. We're going to start off with the contents page as to, if I was in your shoes, how would you attempt this? How would you go about it? Well, we've got the Transport Network Company, TNC. You've got to be on your toes as to the case study is based on the likes of Uber, the likes of Grab. And so they will abbreviate it in the exam to say just TNC, like you can see down the side there. So you've got to be on the ball as to saying, right, I know exactly what that means and the industry it relates to, because that fits into your commercial acumen marks for the professional skills. Now, in terms of breaking the full pre-C notes up, I'd actually separate them out into each of the little subsections you can see there page by page, and I'd probably go on the lines of having either an Excel tab or an actual pen and paper, splitting it up into the 5 different areas, and then from there actually then breaking it down into the subsections, like you can see in part 2, the area of contents 2 there, the overview, Beago market, TNC services, so that your brain can digest it a bit more easily on that. But you'd be pleased to know the first part on there for the introduction right up at the top. I know it's only got a few lines, but this is so underrated from a commercial acumen point of view, actually discussing the scenario properly in your exam, that we've got Beago on there. I've highlighted all of the key names in purple if you're reviewing the notes yourself. And anything underlined in red are just absolutely important key points, terms, figures, elements that you need to be aware of for your SBL exam. So in that introduction on there, first of all, we've got Beago is the Transport Network Company, TNC, operating in the country of Beeland. And first thing for your notes to get down, and I'm going to mention it in the mistakes video on my channel, so make sure you check that out as well. There will be students who will get the country of Beeland mixed up with the company of Beago on that. I can just see it now. Even when you read it through to yourself and you're going through all the full notes, be super careful. Get it down in your notes for that introduction on there. And in terms of what we can look at here and link it into areas of the SBL syllabus, population of 200 million, so there's massive scale and opportunity for Beago to actually sell to a mass of customers. And you could link it into the opportunity factors of a SWOT analysis, and this is going to be also critical when we look at other theories for your notes. Porter's 5 forces, Porter's diamond on there is another one, and Porter's value chain. Beago was established 12 years ago, so it's a mature company, it's established, and the key thing is that it's the second largest TNC business in Beeland, and that is based on revenue and customer numbers. When I had a look at that, I went, it's got great market presence. It's obviously doing extremely well, 12 years into actually being founded on there. And first thing to note down from that about comparison to the competitor. Now you can see just at the bottom next to me that Zemby is the actual main competitor. They are the largest in the actual Beeland market. But when I saw based on revenue and customer numbers, those are the two variables that I definitely have in the back of my mind going into the SBL exam, that if on the exam day they had things that altered the revenue and altered the customer numbers, that changed sort of demand factors and linked into other sort of theories on there, then you've got to say, right, okay, that could be definitely something I want to refer to, and link it back to the scenario, which is only going to impress the market on that. So that's the introduction. I know it's only a couple of sentences, but you go, there's so much information that we can pull on there, and it's going to be critical that you can apply that in your exam. Area number 2 now, in terms of the actual overview, and again, you can read through these in your own time, but I'm just highlighting the main important bits. But you've got to be thinking practically, and this is another area that's going to separate a student who's going to pass and flourish in this exam versus someone who's going to panic read these notes and then go, oh my word, what am I doing? So going into the SBL exam, if it was me, I've got to be having about the TNC industry that obviously it's transportation, it's based on the likes of Uber and Grab, and therefore we've got the different payment methods of a website and a mobile-based app. As you can see, they do not maintain their own fleets of vehicles or employ their drivers directly. So first of all, on that website and mobile-based app, I'm thinking about technology, I'm thinking about data issues, ethics could be thrown in there for that. Or you've got to be thinking of like contingency plans or what if scenarios. So what if Beago's app actually went down? What if that customers didn't actually stop purchasing on the website on there? Those are just the 2 variables from the business model that you need to be aware of, and again could be factored into a sort of Porter's 5 forces or Porter's diamond style question. Then we come on to maintaining their own fleet of vehicles. That's fantastic for keeping their costs down, but could be a limiting factor in terms of the expansion of the business. But you've got to be thinking on the other side that from a capital expenditure point of view, they're not having to buy hundreds or thousands of cars for their drivers. Now, the reason why they've mentioned about employing their drivers directly on there is because Uber were actually involved in a case, you can check it out online, put it on Google, where the drivers actually took it to court to say that they are actually not self-employed on there. They're not working on a sort of basis of just like, yep, I'm working now and then I'm not working now. They wanted to be based as employees. Now, the reason why they want to be based as employees and not, key one for your notes, you can see underlined there, independent contractors, was if you're an employee, you get sick pay on there, you get holiday pay and other perks of being part of a company. The employer doesn't want you to be an employee because then they have to make national insurance contributions as well. So again, just thinking about it from a real world point of view, you can have a little read of the case for 20 minutes or so, just so you get a bit familiar. But it's just so you're aware about setting the scene, about understanding this company on there. Then we come on to the range of services outlined on pages 3 and 4. And again, this is where we get onto the sort of competitive rivalry, maybe even Ansoff Matrix could come into it on there, but we'll look onto those in pages 3 and 4 in a lot more detail. But it's a case of just being aware about diversifying your revenue and the competitors in the market. We then have as well concentration of customers. This is a real positive. This is a strength for the market. If we were looking at a SWOT analysis now, that in Beeland, the country, it's well developed. 80% of its population live and work in the urban areas. So this is where the companies actually thrive on there. So this is where Beago really earns its money. And you could also link this to supply and demand factors. There are limited alternative options on there, so you've got the competitive rivalry factors, but you're looking at you've got the public transport alternatives, buses, trains, but one of the other areas that they've actually diversified into are bicycles as well. So there are alternatives for customers, but it's a case of they will go through the mobile-based app based on if the price is correct and they actually have the disposable income on there. To also set the scene on here for some other factors that link into, say, Pestle, we have, well, that's Pestle's theory, just to be clear. We have Beeland's government is also favourable for this. They actually are saying this is a real positive thing because they've got overcrowding, unreliability on their public transport at the moment, and governments don't want to invest in these areas because that is their funding that goes onto it. What customers want: convenient and reasonably priced alternative public transport. This is what Beago, the company, operates on through their apps. And it's an alternative from a cost saving point of view. So we're looking at different stakeholder groups now for people owning their own car. I mean, if you own your own car, you know you've got the insurance, you've got the other factors on there like wear and tear for it. So if you don't actually have to own a car and you've got a company like Beago who can actually bring in, just call them up, take you where it is, that's where they're meeting the customer's needs and preferences. And that is going to be another factor that they're going to be really, really positive about. Before we get on to the Beeler market now, I've put on the left-hand side, I'm just working out where I am in relation to it, other factors that so many SBL students overlook. And I've put on there the corporate governance factors, agency theory, stakeholder theory, corporate social responsibility, and not forgetting the professional skills marks areas. So let's just break it down as to, for your notes, where could these areas come up when you watch the other episodes that I'm going to come on to in this series going through the full notes. So agency theory is all about the conflict between the managers, the directors who run the business on a day-to-day basis versus the shareholders. And we have this in this situation. We've got the original founders. It's also a listed organisation, so the public can buy it. And we've also been given 6 directors, but we have no idea on their names or if anything's been going right or wrong. So agency theory could definitely be an area that you could refer to on the exam day if a question or requirement was shaped in that way that referred to the directors or the current shareholders, maybe linking back to shareholder wealth maximisation on there. Stakeholder theory I've just touched on. Get it down in your notes. It will come up on your exam, internal and external stakeholders, and just considering the different factors. As we've been going through, my hunch, if you're going to get it down, is the drivers themselves. They've talked about their satisfaction being actually decreasing year on year, and then other factors as well, that the customers haven't maybe been as nice to them. There have been aspects that could potentially go wrong. They love to throw in the SBL exam, a sort of social media news article. So again, different stakeholder groups. And last one on there, the environmentalists who are particularly worried about, obviously, about the planet, because the way that Beago operates, it's a car-based system and they want to reduce that as much as possible. But to be fair to Beago, they're actually putting in electric cars as an option for customers to select. That sort of nicely lays us on to CSR, the concepts and the responsibilities, how the business operates. It's a massive factor on there, can link into pestle analysis for your notes, because we'll come on to it in the next episode. The legal factors. There are cases where they've actually had in this sector, people have been found guilty for a variety of different areas. So again, could be something that could come up, and linking it back to CSR. And last but not least, for this first part, we've got the SBL professional marks. Key thing for your notes on here. The areas that students don't do particularly well on are commercial acumen and skepticism on there. What does that mean in layman's terms? Well, commercial acumen refers to referring to the industry, the scenario, how it logistically works if you were to work in that business. So you've got to link it to the Uber/Grab-based model, understanding how it works through the apps and the drivers and the customers and the payment methods, again, which are all linked in the pre-C notes. But skepticism, the one at the bottom, on your exam day, there will be requirements that the marker wants you to challenge on there. And actually saying, hang on a second, is that correct? Is that the right course of action on there? And that's where you have a balanced argument and you need to actually challenge the requirements back. You will gain marks for that. Analysis-wise, that's sort of, you might get a couple of calculations on the day. We don't know. They could throw it in on there if we get some profit figures as well. But communication evaluation, that's where you bring in your theories. Again, we're going to talk about it in the series itself. Your SWOT analysis, your Porter's 5 forces, Porter's diamond on there. But the key thing, again, just to finalise, which makes me pull my hair out when I mark ACCA exams for providers. That's not for ACCA, not for your exam. These are for students who I help out. just give me a recommendation. Tell me what you would do from your professional opinion. That's what it's coming from, and shaping your arguments as a result. We're starting on the Beeland market itself, and this is where it gets interesting and serious for your exam, and is going to be the difference in students passing or not. First thing to get noted down is the company Zenbi on there. In my notes, everything in purple are the key names, key companies, key individuals that you need to be referring to in your answers. Do not use the words of it or they. Refer to them directly on there. And key bit is that Beago is the second largest company in Beeland. Zenbi is the largest, and therefore they are the two dominant figures, or dominant companies should we say. Between them, they have 85% shareholding. So this is where, from a theory perspective, for your notes, Porter's 5 forces, one of the key areas to that is competitive rivalry. So therefore, again, we've got a massive area that we can talk about here. 14 years ago, Zenbi was actually founded. And then 2 years after that, Beago was introduced to the market. So from a strategy perspective and growth, Zenbi had what I like to call the sort of first mover advantage, the original on there, and that's where their branding may have that sort of foundation, that establishment. And the next key bit for your notes, and you can follow mine that are underlined, to differentiate between the two, Zenbi is globally based, and one of the places they operate is in Beeland, whereas Beago, on the other hand, is just purely based in Beeland on there. So from a opportunity point of view, from Beago's position, if we're looking at a SWOT analysis, well, why are Beago not considering to be operating globally on there? Again, little things that you could throw out there when it comes to your exam if it got tested as a requirement. And in terms of, say, data factors and advances in technology, scale, operations, just have that perspective in your mind that with Zenbi being so globally based, the scale of this company and the synergies that they could have, they're operating on a different level compared to Beago. However, on the other hand, Beago has that advantage of, because they're sort of more locally based and just in Beeland, that is where they build a better rapport because they're operating in 250 cities on there. So it's a balance as to what you've got to consider from that sort of competitive rivalry, Porter's 5 forces sort of way of looking at it. But size, economies of scale I've got in my notes, expertise, I talked about synergies, the brand, trust, reliability, systems, all these little variables could also factor into, say, the technology point of a pestle theory application on there. Another interesting sort of specific area that I think could come up from maybe an ethical point of view or a sort of threat, especially in a SWOT analysis, is that in Beeland, the local authorities hold the main power. They set the criteria for Zenbi, for Beago, and their drivers. So if there was to be some sort of issue, shall we say, on there, then that could be a massive logistics nightmare when it comes to operating the business if they don't have those operating licenses. Beeland as a market itself is very attractive, so that is where there's lots of opportunities for new entrants on there. But again, that comes down to, well, the growth opportunities from an Ansoff matrix point of view. That's another theory on the SBL syllabus, where they've got to look at the existing market versus the actual potential new markets. And Beago as a new market, you've got two options. You've got different cities, new cities they've not entered in Beeland, or operating globally. Could be something that you could throw out there if it was referred to and tested. The 85% for Zenbi and Beago on there, they're massive in terms of Beeland itself, which we've touched on. It's a competitive market, but it's a barrier to entry that you need to get down in your notes, that when you've got two massive competitors at 85%, it could only really take another large multinational PLC to come on board. But they're attracted by the number of users going up and also the amount of revenue, which again has been increasing year on year. You can see that in the figures at the bottom, the customers' numbers that have been registered. They've doubled in the last 8 years. Again, more specific areas for you to refer to actually in your answers on there. And linking to it, by the end of 2003, 25% of Beeland's population were active users in the TNC actual services. So you've got to say to yourself, a quarter of the population, so that's 50 million, you'll see from the diagram on the left-hand side, TNC user growth in Beeland. So it's just ticking up to 50 million, because that's give or take 25% of the 200 million population we saw in the part 1 video. So from a Beago perspective, I'm thinking, right, when I read this through, how can they differentiate themselves? What's their unique selling point? I think because they just operate in the local market, they build that rapport with customers. But then you've got to be thinking from a strategic point of view, the sort of short-term and especially long-term aspect on here, from how can we actually shape the strategy? And that's where we may have changes in factor conditions, such as the economy. And this is where, for your notes, Porter's diamond could come into it as one of these sort of other theory areas, not as regularly tested, but definitely something to bear in mind on there. Coming on to that 85%, you can see my calculations up at the top, and they've come from the market share actually on the little diagram that you can see. It's roughly about 55% for Zenbi, 30% for Beago on there. And in terms of if you get asked about how could Beago grow here, well, you've either got to get the frequency of the customers actually using the platform going up more, and that's because there are other alternatives on there. There's the threat of substitutes, and this is another factor of Porter's 5 forces: the traditional taxi cabs, public transport, trains, buses, cycling, walking. These are factors to consider. And what Beago have got to consider on here before we come on to the services is actually maybe expanding those services, diversifying their revenue streams, or even looking at a new demographic of users on there. So looking at all the variables to go, where can we get bigger? Because Zenbi is struggling to maintain its customer base. It's dropping off year on year on year. You can see on the market share, the dominance is being eroded from 100% down to about 55 now. And just so you can see, linking back to the notes, they said when Beago started operating in 20W2, and that's when you can just see their share, market share starting to grow from there, but they're consistently going up year on year. In terms of the user groups on the next diagram, positively, it's going up on a good trajectory. Is it possibly tailing off in 2003? Something to bear in mind on the exam day, just to be aware of on there. We then come on to, and just be careful on those correct years I've just put on there as a final note on there. Everything's on an upward trend, but one of the key things to bear in mind now are those services. And I've just put on the side, the percentages on the side are for Beago, what they actually do. Again, you can read through these in your own time, but I'm just going to go through the key bits on here. Service ride sharing, it does what it says on the tin, i.e. you share a ride with other people going the same way. The interesting points on here are that Zenbi and Beago initially established themselves as businesses using this business model, but it tends to be only used by students, for example, on there who want that cheaper alternative. But it's basically saying if you want to go to somewhere and a car's already passing by, that is where you can then just hop in that car as well. Both Zenbi and Beago have branched out into other income streams, but the key bit on here from a sort of technology point of view and a customer preference, because it's the customers who are deciding on here, just in case you get this as a stakeholder analysis, the system won't do it automatically to put you into a shared ride. It's up to the customer to select it. So again, comes down to their tastes and preferences, where you can see there the ride hailing is at 72%, what customers mainly prefer. The government as a stakeholder group on there is definitely interested, and from an environmental perspective, from your pestle theory analysis now, all about reducing congestion and the impact on the environment. Because if you've got less people going on single-use cars, that means if they're sharing cars, less are on the road and less emissions on there. Ride hailing and micro-mobility are the next two now. And whilst we're talking about this as to the different revenue streams, these are the threats of substitutes for Porter's 5 forces that you go, okay, what are the different areas that we're looking at here? Or should I say I think that could be one area from a substitute, like competitor to competitor. But the other theory for this is Ansoff's matrix, because you've got to be looking at what are the existing products and what are the potential new products on there. And the existing ones we're going through now, the ride hailing, micromobility, it does what it says on the tin for ride hailing. The core service, just like Uber, just like Grab, it's their main steady revenue on there, and it's their most popular service. So make sure you note that down. 3/4 of the revenue comes from there, and you can get it on demand or scheduled. So again, it used to be the old days, you just hail down a cab, which means you put your hand up, say, hey, I need a cab, and whereas now it's on the app and you do it that way on there. Micromobility is an interesting one on here, where if you're from the UK, you'll know this from the Boris bikes. If you're not from the UK, the principle is that these bikes are in sort of little bays and pods that you go along with your app, tap it on there, and then you take it to another bay or pod, usually close to where you work on there. So from again, it's a sort of shorter trips to avoid heavy traffic, a lot cheaper on there. So considering the different stakeholder groups, again, environmentalists, customers who maybe want this as an alternative, cheaper option. What I thought Beago did really well here, and we get a bit more information later on, is they didn't just set up and do it themselves. They actually bought and acquired a company with the expertise and the foundation. So again, from a strategy point of view, they've done it once, they could do it again, could be a way of expanding their business. And from the other column on the market share graph up above, customers that use TNC's platform book and pay for the bicycle rental on there, so positive in terms of how it actually is used. But then I'm thinking, what else is going on in the real world that the SBL examiners could give you credit for actually applying? And you see them in London. When I went to Prague, they're everywhere. You get those Lime scooters. Again, real world applications from different modes of transport that are being adopted globally on there. I'll come back to the other part of the graph when I come on to the other sources of revenue. But what Zenbi and Beago are doing in terms of their services, there are some grey areas that I go, well, what is currently going on? I'll put it back up because we've got the service base and business service base. Now, if I put my mouse on where I'm referring to, it's this part here on the left. If you look at those other services, and this is the competitive rivalry, that the threats to them as the market leaders, is that the other market share is growing steadily year on year on year. And you can see from the service rentals and the business services, Beago on there have no customer rentals. They only have 5% business services. They've only just started doing it. So there is a risk on there to new entrants coming into the market, meeting the demands and changing the conditions for it. But from a SWOT analysis point of view, from the services, you've got on there a massive opportunity. Again, it's all on the same platform. It's car rental businesses on there, wider, further revenue streams, but they're not actually utilising it. You'll see it when we come on to the KPIs further down. It's broken down. They have none. So again, it's a really important point for you to note down on there, and I really wanted to highlight as a result. Beago doesn't currently have any revenue on there, so we could be having it as a more premium service, all on the same platform again. And the last one we've got is the business services. So they've only been doing this for the last 2 years, who are then, it's relating through the business platforms that they look after their employees and customers. And the key thing there is they're going to have a good reputation. So I went, well, these business owners are then going to travel themselves. So they're going to be potentially actually downloading Beago's app, and they could be new customers on there. It could actually increase the revenue, and it's based on contract income. It's only 5% at the moment. Could be another revenue stream that they could get actually look to increase on there. But linking back to that other column, I'm just there going, how is the other column for market share going up and up and up? What are they doing differently on there? And I think it's going to be some of these services that are currently in place, and there are others further down. I'll quickly scroll it onto, but we'll come on to it in a moment. You can see on there the latest developments, the food delivery services, driverless, electric vehicles. That is those are some of the areas, that I think that other shareholders are taking the market share away from the other companies, because they're specialising in these new areas coming up on there. transport network companies. So we're working on the basis this is an Uber/Grab based system as a company, and I'm going to leave you can read it through yourself. I'm just going to take you through my keynotes and points on the side there. Think about it practically as to it's people who are exploring cities, going to work, shopping, different stakeholder groups who are actually going to use the CNC platforms on there that Beago and Zenby use. Now, this is where I think there are going to be things that could come up on your exam, but you've got to be aware of on there. When a customer buys their travel to use, they either do it by their website or on the mobile. So there is no cash involved on there, first of all. But you've got to be thinking, well, what if the app crashed? What if they leak customer information? And they love to throw in the SBL exam on the day, a sort of news article, press release, social media post, something happens. So again, pop it down in your notes on there. Data-wise, they've got names, addresses, bank details. That is where it could be a massive impact on the company's brand and reputation, loss of revenue, but could also be thrown in as an ethics question as well, depending on what we were given on there. So linking to objectivity, integrity, and have we demonstrated professional behaviour. We've also got the range of services we can talk about later on as well on there. So it depends on what a customer actually wants. But the bottom line is their personal data, their pickup location, where they're going to, are all on this app. And you think to yourself, I'm giving a lot of information away to these companies on there. They will probably know where I live, where I work. And they have these apps where the data will be stored, and a positive on there, a strength, is the digital integration of this. It's got everything from the vehicle model, the number on there, the ease. That is why customers will use the platform. However, one thing I think they may throw in on your exam as a sort of, did the student read the notes properly, is there are two apps on here. So the drivers have an app, and the customers have an app, different interfaces on there, but it's just so that when you're answering the question, be careful to be specific to, is the app involving the drivers or is the app involving the customers on there? In terms of the customers app itself, again, they're going to have the customer's bank details, credit card on there. Payments are taken automatically. So again, no cash. It's very good from a tax perspective for the government because it gets registered straight away. But there is a fraud risk in terms of information on Beago system that is operated by a third party, cloud-based as well, for further data, that if there was a breach there, that could again link to a sort of technology point in a pestle analysis. The drivers themselves, we have the website and the drivers app, but an opportunity from a SWOT analysis perspective is we're not given any indication of any loyalty program to retain customers on there. We've got the main competitor of Zenby, but Beago's actually got to be thinking, how do we retain our drivers and retain our customers? And maybe a loyalty program could be a recommendation you could use in your analysis and evaluation. There are barriers to supply drivers as well, because the drivers must choose the city they may want to drive in on there. And remember, those local authorities we talked about in the previous recording set the criteria for the operating licenses. And maybe with Zenby being international and Beago just being Beelan based, this is where they may have an opportunity here, and that local expertise, Beago, that is why their market share has been increasing and Zenby's has been going down, because Zenby's management and director team and board of directors are thinking internationally, whereas Beago are just focusing on the Beelan market and is one of their positive strengths on there. Sounds like a robust process, as you can see from my notes. Checks to increase the sort of safety aspects. You've got the recent photos. The drivers have got to be put up to a certain standard. But then it comes down to, if you've got to go through, obviously it's great and everything to have background checks and medical records and the quality of the car. But this is the supply of drivers is so rigorous that could actually put drivers off from actually applying, and you may lose them to competitors. It's a barrier to becoming a driver. And it doesn't say if Zenby or Beago actually have any sort of leasing facilities for their drivers. So this is quite an important point there in the top left-hand corner, where we're talking about the barrier to becoming a driver. And you've got two options for a driver. You can either have the car yourself, which again has to be fully insured, kept up to a certain specification on there. And then you've got to say to yourself, the other option is having a leased vehicle. So the leased vehicle will, because it's leased and you go through a third party, will already be to that standard. But we're not told if Zenbi and Beago offer that as a perk out to some of their actual drivers already. And what we have on there as well, just to not so we don't miss it out, the background checks of these drivers are normally carried out by a third-party expert provider. Now again, we're not told who that expert provider actually is. So again, worth noting down in your notes to say, if it came up on the exam day, something about the integrity of the drivers, maybe there was some issue, investigating that third-party expert would be a note that the marker would definitely be very pleased to see from you on there. Lastly, we are also given some areas that drivers do not set their own prices. The TNC platforms itself pay drivers between 75% to 85%. There's a standard sort of rate and charge per kilometre on there, and it's all sort of set out in the app itself. And there are lots of points on here as to who actually sets that percentage. How come it's 75% and or 85%? Because these drivers are working in what is known as the gig economy, freelance work, short-term contracts on there. They are not, remember, they are not employees of Beago for the company itself. So you've got trade union risks here and ethical risks that maybe some of the drivers could get some cash in hand clients, something on those lines, or the drivers may actually want rights as an employee, which we've seen through Uber as it went through the courts in the UK, which some drivers actually won. They were deemed to be employees on there. And what does that mean? Well, you can see on the last paragraph on there, they're independent contractors. That is such an important phrase for you to get down to talk about the drivers itself. It shows that you understand they are not employees, because if they were employees, they'd get things like sick pay, annual leave on there, and Beago would have to make national insurance contributions. The positives, however, are that they actually get to choose their own working hours. So why would someone want to be a driver? Well, maybe you're a student, you're a retired person, you just want to do it here and there. So there are positives to the system. There are benefits that some people just don't want to work more hours than others on there. For anyone who maybe hasn't used Uber or hasn't used Grab, they have the ride hailing and rides actual process on there. Again, it's what you would expect. You order it through the app and then the car comes and it takes you to where it goes. Just be careful that you know specifically between the customer and driver apps, as we've talked about, and it's the same process. It's just making sure you're familiar with it, and so that when it comes on the exam day, you're not just going to yourself, oh, what's going on here? I'm not quite sure. We'll come on to the industry challenges now on here, where we've got perhaps more detail will be provided on the exam day for the Beeland economy itself. But this is where we get into SWOT analysis, opportunities, the economy factors in the pestle theory now, the E on there. So this is where, from a customer perspective, they are going to be using the vehicles, using the services, if the economic factors are good. And they've put it in on here as to, well, slowing down the economy, recession, increasing on fuel costs, which are then going to be passed on to the customers themselves. And these factors I've got on there, make sure you've got those down for your notes, that if there's any hint of customer spending power and confidence going down, that will actually hinder the revenues and earnings of companies like Beago on there. And why is that important? You can see on my notes, it's one of the measurements we had in the introduction in part 1 of my analysis, that Beago is measured as the second largest provider in Beeland on there. The growth of the businesses, again, it's to attract and retain qualified drivers. So that's a massive key note to get down there. The supply and demand effects, that if you haven't got enough drivers operating for you, passing all those screening tests and operating in sufficient hours, then that is going to be a massive weakness to your business, again, from a SWOT analysis perspective. Coming up to the top now, other factors to consider are that if some drivers aren't pleased with the way that Beago are operating, and we're given more information on that, again in the KPIs later on, the driver satisfaction has been going down and down and down year on year, but they could go to Zenbi or other competitors on there. So again, SWOT analysis, potential threats, potential weaknesses, and maintaining and growing the necessary pool of drivers is a massive challenge on there. So again, linking to pestle analysis, SWOT as well, that is where these are the factors and points that you've got to be applying in your answers. There are alternative modes of transport and will depend on economic conditions. Again, attracting new customers on there, wide variety of options. As I mentioned it before about a sort of opportunity of a loyalty scheme, this is where we should expect some change or an issue on the exam day. One key thing for you to get down from this video is the customer preferences, the appeal to new customers. Things will go right and things will go wrong on your exam day in the requirements that are set. And you've got to pivot on that, applying the pre-seen information and linking to some of the other areas you can see on the side there from a pestle theory analysis, where from a safety point of view, it's a major challenge. There are sort of illegal activities going on, both between customers and drivers on there. So you've got the technology factor, how the apps are actually being used. And what we have on here, such conduct has exposed TNCs to several high-profile lawsuits. So you've got the L factor on there from the legal factor, shall I say, from the pestle analysis that it could be thrown in. And from the business's point of view, that could lead to fines, loss of reputation on there. We're then given environmental impacts, again the E part of the pestle theory, where the external factors, rising causes of congestion, air pollution. Governments want people out of their cars because it's a more and more pressing issue. And that's where you have clean air zones. Again, thinking about this from, say, if you've been to London before, if you go to certain central London areas, this is where you get a congestion charge fee put onto you. And it's a technology point on there as to, right, how this work in terms of the apps itself. And then from those charges, if they were to be actually introduced on there and drivers were going into these designated zones, are the drivers liable to pay those actual fees, or is it going to be the companies themselves? Again, little things to consider on there. Last but not least, for this recording, we're just going to have a quick look at the latest developments. Absolutely imperative you get these down on here. Diversifying the revenue streams, food delivery, driverless and electric vehicles. This is where you get an Uber goes to the Uber Eats model on there. So Zenbi will have exposure to this with their global exposure. And in terms of developments, looking at new areas that they can develop their revenue. And you can order the food through their dedicated app on there. So this is happening in some countries. Zenbi's probably had some exposure to this. And it's all in one place on the platform on there. Again, for complete convenience, and can be another revenue stream that Beago could be looking at. We also have driverless or automated cars. Again, Zenbi and other competitors may be using this, but at the moment you currently have to have a supervisor person in there. But if that started to take off, that is another threat aspect of the SWOT analysis. But using the GPS factors, or if there was a crash involved, there could be legal issues from a pestle point of view. And last but not least, the electric vehicles on here. Most of the TNCs recognise their potential as a negative impact on the environment using all this sort of fuel. And on the app itself, it was on a previous point, Beago have actually introduced on their app, it's again a real positive for them from the environmental perspective, that you can actually select an electric vehicle for your journey. You can have a petrol diesel powered one or an electric one on there. But these are different revenue streams that we could be looking at for Beago and to be tapping into the market, to taking more market share off Zenbi, and also keeping up with the competition that we've looked at in previous recordings. I'll just put it up on here as we've just looked through those as well. I'll put my mouse on it. It's where that other market share is going up. These other companies are gaining market share, probably from either these new revenue streams or the services or business services, and that is one of the things that Beago have to be aware of as a potential threat that you could link in your SWOT analysis on there. On here we have the industry key performance indicators are our next area that are just so critical that you are on top of these things because you haven't got time on the exam day to be going back and forward on there. So if we look on the side, I've given you a few little ticks and you can see 1X on there to say the driver satisfaction is the one area which, in terms of the key performance indicators, Beago needs to make improvements on because it's dropped in the past 5 years from 70% satisfied drivers down to 60%. This could also link into ethical areas about pay, safety provisions, level of support. It's one thing about the actual trade unions on there that could come into it, the ethics. That is something that I would definitely make sure that you've got it in the back of your mind when it comes to your exam. Also, one area that I get lots of questions on is, James, where do these link into other areas of the pre-C materials? And I'll take you down to page 13, but just get it down for your notes. When we see active customers, rides completed, revenue, if we just come down to the bottom there, to page 13, again, if you've got these and you've downloaded them yourself, you can find it. But there are the KPIs and linking it to the graphs. Again, revenue increasing, active customers increasing, number of rides completed increasing. And we'll come on to the point up above, but the net promoter score at the bottom left there, there's been a key change as to Beago in the last year has had their points actually increase from 37 to 38, but the industry average has actually dropped on there. And that's all about loyalty, customer satisfaction. So Beago, again, because they only operate in Beeland, they're doing something right there in terms of looking after their customers and providing them with a good service. The other areas to note down on here are, can you see on the left-hand side, I've got the number of active drivers. We're given the graph for the number of active customers, but there was no graph provided for the number of active drivers. Again, just something to put in your notes, could throw up on the exam day, just to be aware of. In terms of revenue, the diversification of income, it's getting more spread out, but they're still heavily reliant on flagging down taxis and people just booking taxis as their main income source. So again, when we come on to that later on into the recordings, just be aware 3/4 of their revenue currently comes from one actual field. Okay, regulation. This is imperative that you get this down because it can relate to so many different areas. It's only 2 paragraphs, but you've got a pest or legal factor there with no overall standards. There are overlaps, a variety of areas and risks on there. So this is where, let me just read it to you. There are currently no overall standards to which all TNCs in Beeland should adhere to in terms of operational requirements, technology and data security, driver status or environmental impact expectations. From a pestle theory perspective, you've got a legal factor in there, you've got an environmental factor in there, and a technology factor in there for you to discuss and pulling in other areas from the unseen information. That is, of course, if it was to be tested. I don't have a crystal ball, but there are lots of feelers out there to say, hang on a second, there's possibility there. So make sure you've got those 3 elements down in your notes. In terms of other countries, so this is not in Beeland, but a possibility for drivers to set up trade unions and for driver networks. Again, that can link into those ethical points I just touched on up above. So drivers are treated, at the moment, they're not recognised as employees on there. So the particular country's legal system, recognising through them employment laws and rights and status, they'd be entitled to sick pay, holiday pay on there. Again, it's coming back to that Uber case in 2021. You've just got to be on your toes for it. They've mentioned it a few times about the drivers not being employees of the company and the reasons behind it. So it could overlap into other areas to consider. Beago overview now in terms of the background. Some of these areas we've touched on, but the bits in purple are the key things for you to get down. Remember and apply their names in your answers if it links to the requirement. But you've got Ed Foss and Kim Lee, the original 2 work colleagues who actually founded and managed the business in Beeland when it was established 12 years ago. As we've seen before, it's a mature company, but they've got the Beeland experience from being in that working mindset. They've lived and worked there. They've seen the problems, and that's how they've developed the Beago, shall I say, the mobile app from their experience and their expertise, because they were looking for a convenient and cost-effective mode of transport on there. Then, after starting out with just ride sharing and ride hailing, they then branched out into other income streams like business rides and bicycles on there. But it's worth noting again, on the right hand side, they have no service customer rentals at the moment in Beago for it. So again, a massive opportunity for a SWOT analysis point on there. In the early days, this is where we've got Kim and Ed were the founders on there, but because the company is now listed, we've got capital structure points on the side here about the demand was getting more and more increasing, and then over the next few years they were supported financially by several venture capitalists on there. It's grown rapidly, and a nice key fact at the bottom there could link into an economic factor of your pestle analysis now. It all comes down to Beago grew rapidly by the end of 2003 and had 16 million active customers. It's predicted to have 19 by the end of 2004. So again, economic factor of pestle and other factors to maybe increase their revenue in different areas. So when we say 19 million, if we look on the diagram up in the top right now, Beago registered and active customers. I've put the little line on there with the 19 just so you can see how it's going up really consistently on there, and it's only a positive, where as the number of cities of Beago operates in, we were told they're up to 250 cities on page 2. It's all looking pretty positive on there, and Beago, I think, have got that real niche of just being a local business operating nationally. I say local business because they're in all these different cities, and they have that good relationship with the local authorities that they need the licenses for. Beago was listed on the stock exchange 5 years ago on there. So we're looking at, I've got it down as 20W9, could be 20W8, but what we're getting at there is since it's been listed, it's only gone up one way. The capital structure breakdown, 80% are large institutional investors, 10% by the original founders, Ed and Kim on there, and 10% held by small private investors. That could link into some agency theory points. Again, just something to bear in mind at the back of your head as to areas that you could throw in and discuss there as to what do the investors want versus what do the board of directors want. We now have as well services offered by Beago. Breakdown on there, we've got the other opportunities on page 6. So what I'm getting at here is, key thing for your notes, no service customer rentals for Beago, first of all, and we currently don't have any other opportunities for services to provide. So opportunities in terms of the business services growing, micro-mobility growing, but the other opportunities, what I'm getting there on page 6, are those you can see on the screen above me: food delivery, driverless and electric vehicles on there. Those are the 3 other areas where they've not explored, and again could come down to some of your theories. And just coming back up to those services, when I say service customer rentals, it's just where my mouse is up at the top. That is in terms of renting vehicles, which I think we have the other competitors within the market are currently taking out those pieces of revenue. But again, a massive opportunity for Beago to take advantage of. Customers demanding a more environmentally friendly organisation now, so they're looking at the different ways to actually come up with a better transport solution. But we have on here, I've got the key bit of note this down. Currently, over 70% of Beago's revenues are generated from ride-hailing services. Again, refer to that particular, 72% in this case. Refer to that within your answers if they want you to talk about revenues on that. Micromobility, this is interesting in how they've actually made strategic decisions about their business. So the micromobility is about going into the market for bicycles that they've actually put onto their app as well. And it links into Porter's 5 forces point from a competitive rivalry acquisition. They didn't just go into it blindly or try to do it themselves. They acquired a competitor in the market on there. They've already had the infrastructure, and it currently has 11% of the revenue. The interesting thing is that the micromobility, the bikes, actually operate in only 100 cities, whereas the taxis, the Uber model that they have, operates in 250 cities. Again, you've got to be thinking, well, what sort of capital and revenue expenditure could we go about? That's another opportunity in our SWOT analysis to grow that revenue greater than 11%. Maybe we might get some competitor information on it as well, but just to be aware of, it has 9 million active users in its micro-mobility services on there, out of the 16 active users, or 16 million active users altogether. So there's definitely scope on there to get more customers to try the bikes. Business services now, 5% of the revenues. A SWOT analysis again, major opportunity. And we have on here, this explains the increases of business services revenues on page 13 from the contracts. So they've had a contract in the last 2 years or so, meetings, customers on there. But remain personal customers is what I'm getting at. That you've got these business people who are using the services for business. Why don't we get them as a personal customer on top of it? So again, just thinking outside the box, looking at the different revenue streams and applying your SBL knowledge. In terms of technology used by Beago, again, for your notes, I'm sure you've already got it down, but the technology factors here from a pestle analysis theory application are just crying out for it. They've got nearly a full page on websites, the apps, the payment processing system, GPS software. I'm just going to take you through my key notes on here, where we're going to interact with the customers and the drivers, front-ended technology, and they're using more than one area of technology here, which is great. It's a sophisticated system on there, better than monthly than others provide, so they pay their drivers weekly on there. So again, trying to satisfy the drivers. They've got more customers growing, but then it comes on to the other areas about data and the efficiencies now and the customer and driver database. So it's efficient, all in one place. Beago had a data breach or systems went, but I'm saying there is, what if that was to happen? So what if on your exam day there was a breach of data or systems went down or there was a leak on there? What would that have in terms of an impact on the business itself? And the GPS software, fantastic technology point, great quality software to retain customers, but then what if the live locations of where people lived and where they were going were all leaked online? From an ethical point of view, what stakeholders would that impact? And again, coming back to the technology part of Pestle. And last but not least, the part at the bottom here for the Beago commercial agreement with a Beamland cloud-based services provider. This shows that they've actually got some of these resources done externally to the business. Key specific case study point here as to deliver and host the Beago technology platform. So it has that commercial agreement with a Beamland-based cloud-based services provider. What if something was to happen to that provider, that their computer systems were compromised? It's really good to see that from a quality perspective, they're continually improving and updating in real time, using machine learning. Again, the technology point of Pestle there, just saying to you, should be on there. And from a strategic perspective, looking at the board of directors now, Beago relies significantly on technology to attract new drivers and customers. Video, social media, email, search engine optimization. But could it be their Achilles heel if something went wrong and that sort of technology went against them and actually drove away customers and drove away drivers on there? Last but not least, the bit at the bottom. Examiners love it when you quote the scenario applicably and in the correct context in your exam. And the one at the bottom there, Beago's marketing message is, we go with Beago. Refer to it. Customers may even become drivers themselves. But if you're making a point in your exam, and if it agrees with that, make it. If it disagrees with that, make it. Because that is their ethos, those values that you can just see at the bottom, which we can refer to, and it's only going to get you some extra marks come the exam on there. Well, that nicely brings us onto Beago's staff. This is a really sort of Well, when I read it through, first of all, I went, what could we get here on the exam day? And I went, perhaps Zemby's information may be provided. It's nothing has been shown in the pre-scene, so it'll be completely unseen information on the exam day to compare Beago to, maybe about efficiencies, how they utilise their staff. And then I went, well, why would they tell us that over 50% of their staff are employed in the research, product management, data science areas? I've done the maths, you can see it on there. So those three areas total up to 2,664 employees based on the information. And we've got a large proportion of the staff are actually in strategic roles on there, looking at the future, the products, all to help the customers out. And they also, you can see on the note there, no sick pay for drivers as they're not recognised as employees. That's the third time I think I've seen it in the pre-seed notes. Just to be clear that they are not employees on there. They are contractors, they come in and they are not entitled to things like annual leave or sick pay. And one of the areas for theories in the SBL exam, it's really important for you to note down, is Porter's value chain. And what that is all about, the value of the inputs and outputs of a business in order to provide the most amount of value to the customers, the people who receive the products or service. And in this case, you go, well, maybe there might be some Porter's value chain analysis on the different functions. I'm just thinking of where it could fit in and the different options, but it looks like, over 5,000 employees, a significant amount, with just being crystal clear, the drivers of Beago are not employees. Speaking of people who do work for Beago, we had then the senior leadership team. And again, we're not given much on there, we're just told the titles. But the key thing for you to get down, as it's a listed company, a PLC, for a PLC, a listed company, you need to have at least half of the board, excluding the chairman, to actually comprise of independent non-executive directors, which you should note for a compliance basis they actually have on there. Now, the key thing on your exam day is you might actually be given the names of maybe one of the directors on there, or they could actually maybe appoint someone else to be on the board, and then you've got to think about the ratios between NEDs to executive directors. But if they do give you a name on the exam day, link it back to that senior leadership structure, understand what their position is and what their role is in the organisation. What I'm getting at there is students fail to pick up on marks on the SBL exam because they're not specific enough in the areas they're referring to. So let's take, for example, the Chief People Officer. If there was an ethics issue, which there is going to be somewhere in your exam, then the Chief People Officer is the member of the team on the senior leadership structure who is accountable for areas that involve ethics on there, sort of an equivalent HR. So again, just to be aware of little things like that, reading between the lines and just making sure you apply those different areas. And lastly, we touched on it in the episode 1 of our analysis, but it was a case of this could also link to agency theory involving, well, maybe some of the directors are wanting to go and the leadership team are wanting to go one way, but the shareholders are wanting to go another. So make sure you get that down in your notes. Next, we'll come on to the theories. This is, again, another one of the areas where students will pass or fail this exam. And I've just broken down for you there the key theories and elements of the pre-scene information I think overlap with PESTEL, Porter's 5 forces and SWOT analysis seem to be the 3 most common ones that I found going through this. You can have a read through yourself, but politically, regulation, local authorities and the government all involved in a variety of different areas. Economic points, they've touched on the economy actually going down and having an impact on customer spending. Social factors and people are really the key of the customers, the drivers, some of the stakeholders, but also trade unions and drivers as contractors. As we said, they're self-employed. Technology is just everywhere in this. Data, computer systems, apps, driverless cars. Be on your toes for which area they may throw at you and link it to the particular area of the pre-scene materials. Environmental, because it is a car-based industry, emissions being very high on the agenda list, government and also other stakeholder pressures, and not overlooking the last part, the law and risk issues under the legal L for non-compliance, fines, data breaches, safety of drivers and customers. there's a lot to go at on Pestle, I think, again, but I don't have that crystal ball. You can have a little look at Porter's 5 forces. Buyer power, supplier power, not given too much on that, but competitive rivalry, substitute options and threats of new entries are definitely prominent there. So you could get more supplier and buyer information on the exam day if they were to test it. But more likely, I think, is a sort of SWOT analysis with a bit of evaluation. Some of the strengths that we're looking at here in terms of Beago, established in 250 cities on there, second largest firm and growing. Some weaknesses about new competitors entering the market, and some of the revenue streams and segments they actually haven't tapped into. Opportunities wise, I mean, who knows what they could ask you on that, but you've got so much to go on. International expansion, loyalty schemes potentially overtaking as the market leader, and threats, new multinational companies, it's a prosperous market on there, technology advances, smaller firms taking market share. Do not overlook it. Other areas of the SBL syllabus, again, can come up, has come up in the past. Porter's value chain analysis and Porter's diamond analysis. So in terms of the value chain, I just touched on it above with the employees as to the inputs and outputs, trying to provide the most amount of value and analysing the particular different areas so that that product that they give to the customer at the end is the best possible quality on there in terms of value. The diamond factor are the 4 pillars on there, shaping strategy about the investing and operating of the business, which I'm sure as you've watched all the videos through, you go, they've been investing in cycling on there, they've been doing that, they've been operating in 250 places, they're going to be probably expanding again because they're growing. So Porter's diamond, don't overlook it on there. You've got the demand conditions that are affecting the business, you've got other factors such as the economy, to be considering for the conditions on there. You've got the demand conditions, factor conditions, strategy structure of the rivals as well. How are they performing, which we can see from Zemby is actually decreasing, and other supporting industries. We could get thrown more information on the exam day. Last but not least, we've got ANSOS matrix on the side, all about growth and opportunities. Again, I think if it was going to come up, it would be something to do with the board of directors, which we've not been given too much information. But the variables you've got to be looking out for there are the existing versus new markets. You can have a look in your tuition packs on this to see the diagram for it. And then you've also got existing versus new products. So products and markets are the 2 variables, and you've got to be thinking of market development, diversification, market penetration, or product development as the actual outcome and strategy that the board should be looking to implement on there. Sorry, lots to go through. Important stuff. But you can see as I'm saying to it, you're going, that's got a chance of coming up, hasn't it? We then come on to the extracts of Beago's risk register. Do not overlook these. We'll just go through them one by one. So we've got reputation, brand and culture. So that's going to link into the website extracts you can see on the side with their vision, values and mission. Be sure to quote those as well in your actual answers. Links to Beago's mission statement, as you can see, it's all pretty good on there. They've got a strong reputation, safe and affordable. The only area of greyness was the driver satisfaction has been decreasing year on year though. So again, not all perfect, but that would harm some of the reputation and branding. In terms of areas of theory, it's linking back to Pestle again, where we have the social and legal factors about the driver's safety, illegal activities, and they love to throw in real world situations like social media, news articles that could get leaked on there, where you have to evaluate it and provide your professional opinion. So refer back to those values and missions and quote them back to say, is it agreeing with it or is it actually not? Where do they need to improve on that? Failure to maintain culture, which employees value and wish to work within. So again, we've got more Pestle social factors that you could refer back to in the risk register. Technology, which you would expect from this sort of app-based, web-based organisation, comes up again. From a technology factor, they've got about security breaches, unauthorised access. And make sure you're aware of this, that they are not in control of, as you can see on there, their cloud service provider, as it's a third party. But then it ensures it maintains sufficient investment in systems and security reliability. So Beago don't actually control that in terms of their third-party cloud-based service. That is someone else, and we might be given more information on the exam day. Competition-wise, as we come down to the bottom here, we then have economic factors about new entrants, rapid changes on there, competitive position, and really pointing back to the senior leadership team there. If you get something about the competition factors, well, that's going to be for the CEO, the CFO, as to saying, have we got the resources and what is our strategy going to be to compete with taxi cabs, public transport, other businesses on there that want to take our market share. We then have the licensing and industry regulations. Do not underestimate this point. This is from the local authorities because it's only in Beago where they're operating and it's on a city by city basis. If the local authority does not grant the licenses for the actual company Beago, then they have a massive impact on their sales and the way that they actually operate. So do not underestimate it from a customer and safety point of view. It's only going to impact on quality, profitability, and also recruiting drivers on there. And last but not least, you can see at the bottom of these notes that link into the risk register, and I wanted to include it because the external examiner notes this in their report every year, that ethics is going to be on your exam. It's embedded on there. If you're watching this and you've got time to do your ethics and professional skills module, brilliant. But most students who are watching this have probably got the exam in less than a week. The key thing here is, one, applying the code of ethics to the scenario is one, integrity, objectivity, not being biased, honest as you would expect, professional behaviour, selecting which area of the code of ethics has been breached on there, and then lastly, apply, actually use the words, use the actual points on there to be referring it to professional behaviour, using the word integrity. That is what the market is going to want to see, and that is how you're going to pick up on the marks, especially if you link it back to the scenario and the keynotes that we've got on here for those particular areas, because that is what is going to set you apart, breaking up your answers. And then last but not least, whilst we're touching on the point of ethics, is when you're going through the requirements, try to pick up on the key buzzwords that the examiner is using as well, and use those to shape your answer back. Make sure you plan your answer out and refer back to some of the pre-C notes that we've gone through in today's video. But let's now start with part 4 on here, where we've got the Beago website extracts that, again, highly examinable areas, and things as well in terms of the mission, the vision, and the values for your notes that I would directly quote on the exam day if you find a point or you have a discussion or that you're asked to evaluate something that either agrees or disagrees with that mission, vision, or values on there. Let's just go through them one by one. In terms of the mission, that it relates to providing communities with affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport. Well, there's nothing to go against that mission that we've seen so far, but on the exam day, that of course could change. They offer services at a reasonable price across Beago, 250 cities as we've been told. But I've got in my notes the biggest risk to breaking the mission from the pre-seen information is sustainable transport on there. But Beago are offering solutions like electric car options for their customers, but it's because of the type of business it is. It's involving cars, it's involving emissions, it's an Uber-based business on there. So it is going to impact on the environment. In terms of the vision, you could link a point to actually diversifying their income streams here, as we're told, a world where transport and technology work seamlessly to bring people, businesses, and communities together. And I went, Beago on there, saying our world. Well, Beago only actually operate in Beago. So is this a sort of SWOT analysis opportunity factor that actually expanding overseas, and we could refer back to the vision point here? Again, something I'd get down in your notes and be specific to their point on the world. Values is another interesting one where they say on here, our ethical code of conduct, ensures we maintain our focus, high ethical and professional standards, safety of our customers, drivers, and communities we work in. So it could refer to a stakeholder analysis on there, internal and external to the business, applying ACCA's code of ethics here back to the scenario, and questioning the values is going to be really key for picking up on those professional skills marks. But the thing that really stood out to me is they say our ethical code of conduct. And I went, what ethical code of conduct? You have no ethical code of conduct provided for by Beago in the pre-seen information. So something to get down in your notes that could come up, and where would that relate to on there? We're on to now committed to safety and committed to the environment, but this is something from an exam technique point of view, especially if you're doing SBL for the first time. Please expect things to go wrong on the exam day for Beago. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows on there. And when we're looking at some of the points on here for safety, we've been given that they do annual background checks on there for drivers carried out by a third party, but we don't know who the third party is. And in terms of, we may get more information on the exam day about this, but why are the checks not continuous like the criminal record monitoring you can see in the point below? Why is it annual? Because there could be a delay, a lag in actually identifying if someone who was driving for Beago, who we do not want them to be representing the company. We've got on there, but what about the delay in terms of convictions and systems? Again, thinking from a data and ethical point of view, just think if you're a customer who got in a taxi with someone who actually had an actual criminal record on there, which the company, through their third party, were not on top of. How is this checked through in terms of the safety program that the drivers actually go through on there? Again, I'm thinking from a practical sense that they're going to put these areas in your exam to test if students have been through, who's been through the pre-seen information, so you know about the driver's app and the customer's app, especially if you've been through All My Analysis. There's great security on there, friends and family notifications. Most of our drivers' vehicles have been equipped with cameras on there, so and it records rise to protect both customers and drivers. And it says partnered with several on there. So I'm there going, okay, several, and how many, if not, or how effective in terms of these cameras are they about putting that into play? Like, what actually goes on with this? But the key bit, I always refer to key notes, and let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a video just on key notes that you could quote, is data privacy and the storage and uses of customers' data is a top priority on there. So if you got anything on the exam day that went against that, make sure you refer to that quote of top priority. And they also have here where you see another key word of, we also expect our cloud service provider to operate with the same standards in terms of protecting and managing our customers' personal data. So that's not in Beago's control. It's a pestle potential legal factor, a technology factor there that maybe there could be a fine, maybe there could be a lawsuit, we don't know, but it's a case of it could come up on your exam day, so you need to be aware of it. Driver satisfaction has been below 80% for the last 5 years, and this is one of those statements that you go, at the end of each ride, drivers and customers must rate their ride. Any customer or driver who submits a rating below an 80% satisfaction is prompted to provide more details. And you go, well, it's been below 80% for 5 years. What happens with these details? What actually goes to continually improving the service on there? In terms of the environment, again, pestle analysis for the theory, the environmental factors. We've been given those two stakeholder groups, the government and communities, that you should refer to about the towns and cities that the harmful emissions go into. We encourage customers to select share rides and micro-mobility options. Again, steadily increasing on the micro-mobility options, but the shared rides are dropping on there. But how are they encouraging customers? It's more to do with the preferences of those customers, and we really need more information as to why. And lastly, we continue to invest further in our micro-mobility infrastructure across Beeland. Now that's an interesting point because they currently only operate in about, I think it was about 90 or 100 cities, and they operate for the cars in 250. So that 11% revenue, I think, could only go up if they really put their full focus into it. We're coming on to the final parts now in terms of could we actually recommend features such as a loyalty scheme on there. There are no targets set for environmental KPIs by Beago on here. Again, could be something from an environmental pestle analysis. No information about how Beago incentivizes both drivers and the customers, maybe on a loyalty scheme. And they touch on here about such as assisting our drivers in making contact with electric car rental businesses, but Beago has 0% sales of the service customer rental. So it's one of those sort of statements you go, but we're not operating in that sort of sector. Again, could be an opportunity for us to look at in a bit more detail. The KPI diagrams at the bottom are really interesting now. To bear in mind, for Zenbi's equivalent KPIs and details, we could be provided on the exam day. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but you're trying to read between the lines here to say, well, we've been given the revenues increasing year on year, the active customers is going up year on year as well. So maybe we could be given the same figures as for Zenbi, our main competitor, in terms of revenue. To get down from that diagram in 2003, it looks like we could be possibly hitting $1 billion, $1,000 million there in 2004, just to be aware of, not to get your units mixed up. Don't get too worried about getting the figures and everything exactly right. So for the active users, saying that it's gone over 50 million in 2003 is perfectly fine. But as we know from Ed and Kim on page 7, it's predicted to rise to 90 million in 2004. Growing, but customers need to be retained and nurtured. So active customers are going up, but we need to look after them. Loyalty programs, as I've mentioned before. Rides completed, we don't really have too much more to go on, apart from it's a positive increase, something for you to refer to, where they could be actually about to hit 100 million. But the percentage of revenue per service is the interesting one about, well, as you're aware, we've already got the ride hailing, the normal service is being the largest one. And we've got on there the business services has increased in the last 2 years from that contract. Looks pretty profitable, so that could be increasing or an opportunity into the future. There's no service customer through rental cars on there. So again, 0%. Maybe Zenbi holds most of this in terms of the market, or the other competitors that we saw on the other market share graph. Partnered with several national organisations, see on page 8, for those business services. Why don't we find some more? Why don't we increase that revenue stream as an opportunity? In terms of the Net Promoter Score now, this is measured on the customer satisfaction and loyalty rating. In other words, the higher the better. And Beago actually got better in the last year from 2002 to 2003. And a key change for you to note down is the industry average actually dropped on there. So you can see it dropped from 37 to 36, but Beago actually went from 37 up to 38. So they have done something positively on there. We might get a few more details on the exam day about it, but are worth noting as a positive from a customer perspective. And last but by no means least, we've got the drivers on there for a driver satisfaction graph. And you can see it's on a downward trajectory. It's still over 60% satisfied, but it's been dropping the last 3 years running. And we had that fact about if it's less than 80%, the driver must provide an explanation. It was on the previous page. So why is this happening? What is going wrong with the drivers? And again, something from an ethical trade union perspective we could get on your exam day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, takes you through my full analysis for your September 2024 SBL exam. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any other videos on the channel. Click the link in the description below to access these exclusive notes. You can download them yourself and check out those Astranti mock papers and packs to help you be those little differences to get you that pass. And what I've done as well is I've put a few videos for SBL above. Make sure you click one of those. I'll see you on the other side now, and best of luck with your exam.